I didn't expect to be humiliated at a child's birthday party, but the moment my granddaughter laughed, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. We were inside her classroom, walls covered in bright posters, the air thick with chocolate cupcakes. Sunlight poured through tall windows, children sat cross-legged on the floor. Parents lined the walls, smiling, recording, whispering. Then it was time for gifts. When my turn came, I handed her a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a knitted pencil pouch and a short handwritten letter. I'd stayed up late making it, my fingers aching, believing she would feel loved. She opened it, looked once, then laughed. "Why is it so ugly?" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few kids snickered. Someone gasped. She lifted it higher and added, "Careless and cruel. Did you make this because you're too poor to buy something normal?" The room froze. No one spoke. A parent shifted uncomfortably. I could hear the classroom clock ticking. My chest tightened. My throat closed. I wished I hadn't come. Before I could say a word, a woman stood up from the back of the room. It was her teacher. Miss Reynolds walked forward calmly, but there was something unshakable in her eyes. She picked up the letter that had slipped from the box and began reading it silently. Her expression changed. She turned to the class. "This," she said carefully, holding the letter, "is not a cheap gift." Every head lifted. "This letter shows emotional intelligence, empathy, and storytelling skill beyond most adults," she continued. "Do you know how rare that is?" Whispers spread. Parents leaned in. Phones slowly lowered. My granddaughter's face drained of color. Then Miss Reynolds looked at me and said gently, "May I speak with you outside for a moment?" The room buzzed. Children stared. My granddaughter couldn't meet my eyes. In the hallway, Miss Reynolds stared at me in disbelief. "I read your essays years ago," she said. "You helped start the community reading program downtown. I studied your work while training to become a teacher." I had never told anyone, not even my family. Behind us, the laughter inside the classroom had faded, replaced by confusion and respect. Miss Reynolds smiled softly. "They don't know your story," she said, "but they will." My granddaughter stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the pouch like it suddenly weighed too much. But this wasn't the end, because what Miss Reynolds was about to say to the class, the parents, and my granddaughter would flip that room completely. And to understand why that gift mattered so much, we have to go back. Back to a winter evening 12 years ago, when I first learned what it meant to give without being seen. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to Social Old channel. We're creating a community of people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. It was a winter evening 12 years ago. The kind where the cold doesn't just bite your skin, it settles into your bones. The streetlights flickered early, and the wind pushed dry leaves along the sidewalk like they were trying to escape something. I had just finished my shift at the community center. The building was old. The heater barely worked. My fingers were numb as I locked the door behind me, rubbing my hands together, wondering how I'd make it through another winter. That was when I noticed the boy. He was sitting on the steps outside the library across the street. No jacket, knees pulled to his chest, shoes 2 sizes too small. He couldn't have been more than 9. At first, I told myself not to stare. Everyone has problems, I thought. Everyone is tired. But then he pulled a torn notebook from his backpack and began writing, slowly, carefully, like every word mattered. I crossed the street. "Are you waiting for someone?" I asked gently. He shook his head without looking up. "I'm waiting for the lights to stay on," he said. That sentence stayed with me. I learned his mother worked nights. He stayed outside because their electricity had been cut again. The library steps had light and warmth from the building walls. I had no money to give him, none, but I had time. So I sat beside him. I asked what he was writing. Stories, he said. If I write them down, they don't disappear. Something in my chest cracked open. That night, I went home to my tiny apartment, pulled out my old notebooks, and reread my own unfinished essays, pieces no one had ever wanted to publish, dreams I'd folded away when life got heavy. The next evening, I brought him a notebook. The next week, a pencil. Then another child joined us. Then two more. We met under streetlights, on library steps, in borrowed classrooms. I taught them how to shape a thought, how to give a feeling a spine, how to let words breathe. No one paid me, no one clapped, no one noticed, but the children started smiling differently. Months later, the community center let us use a room. Someone donated books. A teacher observed quietly from the back one night. I never put my name on anything, because it was never about being seen. It was about giving something that couldn't be taken away. And that was why, years later, my fingers ached as I stitched that small pencil pouch, why I wrote that letter slowly, carefully. Because to me, it wasn't just a gift, it was a language. And the people laughing in that classroom had no idea what it had already saved. The birthday invitation arrived 2 weeks early. Pink cardstock, glittery letters, a cartoon crown in the corner. Classroom celebration, it read. No party hall, no games, just cupcakes and gifts. I stared at it longer than I should have. I wanted to bring something that felt meaningful, not loud, not expensive, something that said, I see you. I went to the market anyway. The toy shop was crowded, plastic boxes stacked to the ceiling, music blaring, children tugging at their parents' sleeves. I picked up a doll, put it down, picked up a puzzle, put it down again. Everything felt temporary. That night, I pulled out my yarn basket, the one I hadn't touched in years. My eyesight isn't what it used to be. The stitches were uneven. I had to redo the corners twice. My fingers cramped, but I kept going. As I worked, I thought about my granddaughter learning to write, about her pencils rolling off desks, about how a small pouch could hold something important. Then I wrote the letter. I didn't write about money. I didn't write about sacrifice. I wrote about noticing, about how words can protect you when the world laughs, about how creativity is a quiet kind of courage, about how being gentle doesn't mean being weak. I folded the letter carefully, too carefully. The morning of the party, I wore my good sweater, the one without stains. I wrapped the box in brown paper because the colorful wrap at the shop felt dishonest. When I reached the school, parents were already gathering. They compared gifts openly, bright bags, shiny ribbons, loud excitement. I smiled when spoken to, stayed near the wall. Inside the classroom, the children bounced with energy. Cupcakes waited on a tray, a teacher adjusted decorations, someone started filming before anything had even happened. I told myself, it's fine, it's just a moment. When my granddaughter saw me, she waved, then quickly turned back to her friends. That should have been my warning. When it was time for gifts, the teacher called names one by one. Each present was unwrapped with practiced enthusiasm. Then she said my name. I stepped forward, suddenly aware of the box in my hands, how small it looked, how plain. I gave it to my granddaughter. She opened it, and before she laughed, she glanced around. That was the part that hurt most, because she wasn't looking at me. She was checking who was watching. She stared at the pouch. Just for a second. Then she laughed. Not a shy laugh, not confusion, a sharp, sudden burst, too loud for a classroom. "Why is it so ugly?" she said. The word echoed. A few children giggled, unsure if they were allowed to. One parent sucked in their breath. Another lowered their phone but didn't stop recording. My granddaughter turned the pouch over in her hands like it was a joke someone had handed her. I felt heat rise to my face. She held it up higher and added, her voice careless, practiced, "Did you make this because you're too poor to buy something normal?" The room collapsed into silence. No laughter, no correction, just the hum of the lights and the ticking clock on the wall. I became painfully aware of my hands, of how empty they felt now. Someone shifted their weight. A chair scraped. A cupcake tray rattled softly as the teacher's hand froze midair. I wanted to explain. I wanted to say I stayed up late. I thought of you. This wasn't about money. But my throat closed. I could feel every parent's eyes, not cruel, not kind, just watching, waiting to see how someone like me handled being put in their place. My granddaughter avoided my gaze. That hurt more than the words. She laughed again, smaller this time, and shrugged. "It's fine, I guess," she said, setting the pouch aside. Like it was nothing, like I was nothing. I stepped back, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the children could hear it. I wished I had stayed home. I wished I had bought something loud and forgettable. I wished I had never tried to give her a piece of myself. That's when a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Someone stood up, and for the first time since the laughter started, the room shifted. The chair scraped again. Ms. Reynolds stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She walked forward with the kind of calm that makes people stop breathing without knowing why. She picked up the letter that had slipped onto the floor, not like trash, like something fragile. She read it silently. The room waited. I watched her face change, slowly. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes softened. She reread one line, then another. She looked up. "This," she said, holding the letter so the class could see, "is not a cheap gift." The words landed heavy. A parent cleared their throat. Someone else shifted their phone down, unsure if they should still be recording. Ms. Reynolds turned to the children first. "This letter shows empathy, emotional intelligence, and storytelling skill beyond most adults," she said evenly. "These are things you can't buy." The room felt different now, thicker, quieter. She looked at my granddaughter. "Do you know how rare it is for someone to give their time and heart like this?" My granddaughter's smile disappeared. Ms. Reynolds didn't scold her. That would have been easy. Instead, she turned to the parents. "We spend a lot of time teaching children to recognize value," she said. "Today is a lesson in what real value looks like." Phones lowered. No one laughed now. Then Ms. Reynolds looked at me. Her voice softened. "May I speak with you outside for a moment?" The words weren't a request. They were an acknowledgement. The children stared. Parents whispered. My granddaughter's face drained of color as I stepped toward the door. For the first time since I arrived, I wasn't shrinking. I was being seen. And in the hallway, away from the eyes and the noise, Ms. Reynolds would say something that would change how that room looked at me forever. The hallway was cooler. The noise from the classroom softened into a distant hum. Murmurs, confusion, the scrape of small shoes. I stood with my hands folded, unsure what to do with them. Miss Reynolds looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, not politely, not carefully, in disbelief. "I know you," she said. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" She shook her head slowly. "I read your essays years ago, when I was still in training." My heart skipped. "You helped start the community reading program downtown," she continued. "I used your work in my coursework, your approach to teaching empathy through storytelling." I hadn't heard those words spoken aloud in years. "I didn't know anyone remembered," I said. Miss Reynolds laughed softly. Most people don't know who started the things that changed them. She paused, then added, "You never put your name on it." I looked at the floor. I didn't need to. She nodded, like that answer confirmed something she'd already believed. Inside the classroom, the voices grew quieter. I could sense the shift even through the wall. "They don't know your story," Miss Reynolds said gently, "but they're about to." I felt something loosen in my chest, relief mixed with fear. "I don't want to embarrass her," I said quickly. "She's just a child." Miss Reynolds met my eyes. "Then we'll teach her," she said, "not shame her." She opened the door, and when we stepped back into the classroom, the air had changed. Every parent was watching. Every child was silent. My granddaughter stood frozen near her desk, the pouch clutched tightly in her hands, like it had suddenly become heavy. Miss Reynolds walked to the front of the room. What she was about to say next would make silence impossible. Miss Reynolds stood at the front of the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. That made it worse. "I want everyone to listen," she said. Children straightened. Parents stopped whispering. "This classroom celebrates reading and writing," she continued. "But today, we're going to talk about why they matter." She held up the letter. "This was written by someone who helped build a reading program many of your children benefit from," she said. "Someone who taught empathy long before it became a lesson plan." A ripple moved through the parents. Miss Reynolds turned slightly, enough to include me without putting me on display. "Some of us measure value by how much something costs," she said calmly. "But the most powerful gifts are often the ones that come from lived experience." She looked at the children. "When someone gives you their time, their effort, their care, that is not something to laugh at." The silence pressed in. Then she turned to my granddaughter. "This gift," she said gently, "was not made because of poverty." My granddaughter swallowed. "It was made because of love." Something cracked. A parent in the back nodded slowly. Another lowered their eyes. I saw understanding spread, uncomfortable but real. Miss Reynolds didn't stop. "Words can humiliate," she said, "but they can also heal. Today we choose which ones we remember." She placed the letter back into the pouch and set it carefully on the desk. The lesson was over, but the impact had just begun. My granddaughter stood there, trembling slightly, staring at the pouch like it had transformed into something she didn't know how to hold. And for the first time, she looked at me. Really looked. Not with laughter, not with embarrassment, but with confusion and something close to shame. The party ended early. Cupcakes went uneaten. Decorations came down slowly. Parents spoke in hushed voices, avoiding my eyes, not out of shame, but awareness. My granddaughter stayed behind. She walked up to me with the pouch clutched to her chest. "I didn't know," she said. Not, "I'm sorry," not yet. Just the truth. "I know," I replied. She opened the pouch carefully now, smoothing the stitches with her fingers. She pulled out the letter and read it again, this time slowly. "When you wrote this," she asked, "was it really for me?" I nodded. She bit her lip. "I didn't think handmade things mattered," she whispered. "Everyone else brings big gifts." I knelt so we were eye to eye. "People will always show you what they can buy," I said, "but very few will show you who they are." She didn't answer. She just hugged the pouch tighter. That night, Miss Reynolds sent me a message. "Thank you for reminding us what teaching is really for." Weeks passed. My granddaughter started carrying the pouch to school every day. One afternoon, she asked me to help her write a story, then another. She never laughed at handmade things again, and I never stopped making them. Because gifts aren't about being impressive, they're about being honest. And sometimes the most valuable thing you can give a child is the lesson you didn't know they needed. If this story moved you even a little, share it with someone who believes love is measured by price tags, because the quietest gifts often last the longest.